Hello again, Attribution enthusiasts. This is episode 16 of Attribution Radio, and I'm your host, Gail Buffington. A topic weighing heavily on the minds of just about every attribution practitioner out there is Google Analytics 4. GA4 represents possibly the most wide-reaching shift to the attribution landscape in over a decade. And now, as we're staring down the June 30th deadline to switch all Google Analytics properties to GA4, marketing and analytics professionals are scrambling to understand the nuances of the new tool, ensure their data integrity, and operationalize it.
So I've been in the agency world since 2010. Most notably, I was at Tenuity for about 9 years. And I started off in their paid media team before overleading a subject matter experts team, including the analytics team for that portion of it. What we saw is that we were losing more clients to fights over data than it was actually true performance. And Google Analytics is the most widely used analytics tool. That Google Analytics can be broken by anyone who's touching it, any tool who's touching it, any updates that the clients make on their end. And so recognize that there needed to be something that was in place for an actual audit tool that could be routine, and you're not going back to the client every 16 weeks, asking them to pay you for a completely new audit.
Yeah, my background, been in the digital space for the past 17 years, started at the age of 15, web developer, did some SEO PPC when I started, moved just into being a web developer for a while. Did my time there, moved into the SEO PPC side of things. And it was amongst all of that, I realized that I clearly have a passion for data. So that's the thing that, you can prove everything that you've set up is working correctly. And so the past few years, it's been helping businesses primarily based in the UK with their data infrastructure, again, specifically around web-based data. And when Michael and I met up, we realized we both have the same frustrations of people not, even ourselves, not trusting the data so much. So we teamed up and we're now helping businesses better understand their data, especially as they've been pushed from, let's say, Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4. There's a big learning curve there, so we try to help fill that gap and help them better understand the data across the data.
Your models are only going to be as good as the quality of the data that they're ingesting. And that this data has a tendency to go wrong pretty frequently. On average, with any of the accounts that we're looking at, we're seeing that about 40% of the data within Google Analytics is inaccurate. And that inaccuracy is largely kind of a stem from people being used to using Universal Analytics, not GA4. GA4 actually speaks different coding language than Universal did. And so the clients just don't have that set up correctly in the back. Secondarily, if you're seeing issues in Google Analytics, it's usually an indicator that you have bigger site issues. And so that could be that your site's collecting personal information. That can mean that the tags aren't set up correctly, and what you're seeing within Shopify or other reporting tools are wrong, or the data that's being sent back to ad campaigns such as Performance Match, which pulls in directly from Google Analytics, are going to be incorrect. I'd also caution everybody with any of the accounts that you're working on, if you used an automated transition from Google, from Shopify, from any of those other sources, we haven't seen any of those work well. And that's really kind of been what's putting the money on the table for me and Jordan in a great way. But I would caution everybody who knows that their accounts ran that way, that those transitions do not work well. Different events and triggers are overlooked. You're actually pulling in too much unnecessary data, and you're not pulling in the more advanced data that really was the reason for GA4 coming out in the first place. We talked about this for a second, but every 2 to 3 months, you should expect that your Google Analytics data broke somewhere. That's not anybody's individual fault. That could be something as simple as when the tags for Facebook are being put in place. One URL says Facebook, one says it with a capital FB, one says it with a lowercase fb, and now you're going to have your data spread out across multiple different rows within the tool, and it will make it really challenging to find, but you're not going to get a clean expectation of what those results are. And so if you are doing any type of attribution or modeling, that's going to be inaccurate.
So one thing we wanted to make sure we equip you with is some of the key checks that we do for any client we sign up. These are very simple checks to do, but if they haven't been done, if the settings haven't been configured correctly, it will completely ruin your entire GA4 property. So the first one being, and this one is surprising that it's been set like this, but by default, the data retention limit for GA4 is set to 2 months. We have found in more recent times, they've updated their maximum of 14 months, but more often than not, we see that the default has been set to 2 months for the data retention limit. And that simply means that any data you want to look back on prior to 2 months ago with any expiration reports is simply unavailable. we were recently speaking to a client who actually had a big old question mark as to where's all their data gone. They can't seem to drill down enough on their data. Simply put, it was because their data retention limit was still set to that default 2 months period. And to speaking what Michael was saying there earlier about the automated transitions from Universal to GA4, this is one of the settings that for whatever reason they decide to keep it at 2 month period as opposed to the maximum 14 months. The last thing to mention there as well is when it comes to your standard reports, these reports you'll see when you just navigate through the GA4 platform, it does also impact primarily the user data. So after 2 months that data gets wiped, but you will see at least aggregated data for your events in GA4. Essentially with this, if you don't have it in 14 months, you won't be able to drill down properly on your data prior to 2 months. There's a huge gap in the amount of data you're collecting and all the hard work you've put into do so. The next one, very simple, but again, very crucial to make sure it's been set up, is around using the enhanced user data collection features that's in GA4. It's one of the great things about GA4. Universal Analytics had it to some degree, but they really upped their game here. So the idea is to ensure that GA4 can run cookieless, so it helps with privacy compliance, so GDPR, for example. The idea is that you enable these Google signals so that you can actually track users across browsers. And maybe using, if they're signed into, say, the Google product, say Gmail, you're still able to track across browsers. They're signed into both or even devices. So a key part here is around, if I happen to log, if I don't have this setting enabled and I'm accessing a website through multiple devices, I'll be registered as 3, 4, 5, 6 users, as opposed to enabling this, also configuring the website correctly with the cookie banner, consent mode, etc., to ensure that the data is actually accurate. So I'm being tracked with one individual user across multiple devices, as opposed to 10, 15 users in the universe I happen to use to access your website.
This is really important for any account or any client that's running on Performance Max with Google Ads, or for anybody who's running any type of social campaign. This is kind of the best way that you can get ahead and start to have that Google Analytics number match up closer to Meta, and then match up closer to what you're seeing in PMax campaigns, which are notorious for having issues within Google Analytics, but that could be a whole other training that we lead to.
This is a great reminder of how much foundational work is required with a major re-platforming like this. This isn't a simple lift and shift. To set ourselves up for success, there's a need to review everything, top to bottom, auditing even the basics and leaving no stone unturned. Neglecting this opens up potential problems for nearly every business action you take or critical decision you make. And don't forget, the landscape of data privacy legislation is also in constant flux, and staying on top of this in your analytics ecosystem is of paramount importance.
What I know is the data accurate? And so don't necessarily take it for granted that GA is accurate. Use these checks to give you that gut check, and then you'll be able to go down with greater confidence. And then anytime that we're seeing issues with Google Analytics, it's usually a bigger issue that we're seeing on a site. And so, for example, that data layer PII that I just told you about, we were first able to spot in Google Analytics, then just looked at the page source and we're able to show it to the client. It's extremely common for that. And it's also extremely common that there's other issues with the other backend reporting systems if Google Analytics isn't set up correctly. Those other reporting systems might not be, and those tools are naturally trying to get your data a little bit, so it's worth taking another sneak peek at them.
About PII, I understand that recording any PII in GA would have implications like being hacked, but my question is about the fines. On what basis could you be fined for having PII collected in your GA property? And I suspect it's because it's a violation of GDPR or some other regulation, in which case, why does GA allow it?
So I'll hold off on the why they allow it part. I think maybe it was just they rushed the product out a little bit, and there's so many different parameters and ways that it could be sent that they weren't able to scrub it all out themselves too. With the fine, there's two ways to look at it. The first one is Google might suspend your account or terminate the account, and so you'll lose all data. If they catch the PII themselves, then they'll ask you to redact the data, and then that would be all of the data from the date ranges that's there. So you'll be missing weeks, months, or whatever of data potentially from their side.
So they'd be the ones finding you for for
kind of
something
finding
that
your
they're-
data. Yeah, potentially. We haven't taken up as much action on that as we'd expect, but we're also starting to see a lot more pressure and angry emails go to different brands and clients about it. Now, Google, to our knowledge, is not reporting when this is being seen to the GDPR or CCPA. So it would be up to the state of California or the EU to find that data. I think that most of the part, Google doesn't want to go into your Google Analytics account themselves. Ask them to set up these reports and see how well they do doing it. So I think for the most part, be ahead of it, but recognize that the PII is probably a larger issue that it's being sent in the first place, and that's a site issue and a tagging and tracking issue. And so we're almost always able to see that in the baseline email. The example I used on the last class is if I were to buy a product, so I love cooking, I just bought a sous vide, and if within the UTM coding that I send to my mom or my sister who loves to blog, there's PII in it, my sister's going to blog about it, then my credit card information and email address, etc., is going to be tied to that. And anybody who clicks on the blog link might already be logged into Anova Culinary with my information, and they're like, oh shoot, a free purchase.
Wow. Okay.
So it's more about the site. Yeah.
That's
Sorry,
crazy.
I was trying to add some numbers to it as well. Last time I checked, not mistaken, if you search it with GDPR, I'm pretty sure the number's still $100,000 or 4% of your gross income, whatever is higher. That's the basis for it. So that's why Google was being fined constantly in Europe. Even with the idea that they originally were collecting data just in the US, they then had to make sure that the data is being warehoused in Europe. That's part of the law. PI was being collected. There was been a whole bunch of things that were tracking without proper consent. Google can take the hits, $100,000 to Google. No, they have that. But that was why they pushed for GA4 cookie lists, try to include these things about PII. But when it's being collected, it's your person that is collecting that data. So the best thing Google can do to you is shut down your accounts. The best thing GDPR regulators can do is give you a hefty fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Very helpful. Thanks, guys.
Point on it. Yeah. Between 2020 or 2021 and 2022, the amount of data privacy lawsuits doubled. And I think the expectation is for it to triple on top of that this year, if not go up by more. And a lot of those, I think, are just settled too, so you're not hearing about it. So it is a growing concern for companies.
Like on the website, you can have user IDs, right? And then you can match them back to emails. Is that something that's allowed in GA?
So this is actually a gray area, at least when it comes to GDPR. So for the longest time, I didn't want clients to push website user ID into GA4 because some of the rules in the GDPR basically are saying that if you can tie back one system data with something else, so I'm going to take your user ID from GA4, search it in your let's say Shopify store. If I can then get PII, that would then count as the user ID will count as PI itself because you use it to search up a database and find it. Google does allow it, and this is very much that grey area. So for now, we're kind of easing up on that. So maybe to still be aware of it, that you can collect it, but based on the word, at least in GDPR, it's still, again, very much grey area. So be very cautious and keep an eye on those changes. So originally, when those policies first came out, I wasn't allowing clients to send that kind of data to Google, because again, if I was to grab that ID, search it on your system, I can find that PII, that counts, and I can find that name, address, etc.
This is absolutely a gray area. Let's actually, Jordan and Michael, for me to capture it in my CRM system is not an issue, right? I can collect it on GTM. I can pass it to whatever my CRM system is. That's okay. But when you pass it to GA, you need to hash it and make sure that it's not PII anymore. That's the only issue. But Mike, you should be able to take email addresses from, that's standard practice.
Okay.
GA4 brings a lot of new flexibility and efficiency for web analytics, but there's also some major challenges as marketers and analysts are finding out on the ground right now. The ripple effect from GA4 launching this summer is likely to be felt long afterward. However, this has opened a golden opportunity for teams to take a long and hard look at their data infrastructure, governance, and operations. That's our episode for today. Thanks for listening to Attribution Radio. I'm Gail Buffington, signing off.